am fascinated by getting out at night, but I find it harder to do. I mean, you get sort of in your, and I think it's an atavistic human condition to be a little bit afraid of the dark, right? Because we come from a background in our evolutionary history of where it was pretty important to stick close to the cave or close to the fire because we were part of the food chain in a very different way. And there were dangers lurking in the darkness. So I think some of that sticks with us and it makes it harder to get outdoors. But if you can, force yourself away from the light and so forth, it's a wonderful time to explore. It's a wonderful time. And one of the things that makes it fun and is a good practice is to take a flashlight and allow yourself to focus all your attention on just what's in that little beam, just what's in the beam, what's visible, because it's challenging sometimes when we're out in the daylight and there's all this stuff we can see. What do you look at? My gosh, it's sort of overwhelming. Well, if you go at night and you have a flashlight with a narrow beam, you're just looking at one little patch and you'll see all sorts of interesting things there.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Energy Podcast. My name is Fahad, and I'm the host of this show. Guys and gals, I have a confession to make. Back in 2016 or 2017, I made a huge decision when it comes to my social media consumption and my online presence. So here's what I did. I went to my Facebook and on Instagram and unfollowed everybody. And I mean it. Everybody. And the only thing that shows up on my feed nowadays is just business stuff and ads. Those are the only two things that I get to see most of the time. And one of the reasons why I did this was because I was noticing that social media consumption can be a huge trap and time sink, leading to doom scrolling and us just going into these wormholes of trying to compete with people, look at people's feeds and all of that kind of stuff. I just wanted to kick it all out, and that's exactly what I did. Now, one of the things I noticed was that I started noticing more about my own lifestyle, focusing more on the people that were in close proximity to me. I also turned off all of the notifications that were on my phone that didn't have any sort of business context to them. The only notifications now I get on my phone are either pertaining to the business that I do, or maybe just a phone or a text from my friends and family. That's basically the crux of my social media consumption and phone usage. Now, this really does tie into the guest we have today because Thor Hanson, our guest, is an awesome human being who really does focus on subtle things. And this is the theme of our podcast as well today, that sometimes when you point a magnifying glass at some of the most smallest pieces of planet Earth, you can see a whole ecosystem of life and symbiotic relationships happening over there. So I met Thor a few years back when I was doing a deep dive on the history of nuts. In our energy pods, we use almonds as a base ingredient. So that kind of organically tied in with what Thor was doing in his book called Triumph of Seeds. I eventually brought him to my previous Keto Geek podcast. He was amazing. I had a great time conversing with him. He's a wealth of knowledge. Like, seriously, you guys are going to have a blast today. And then when I did another episode later down the road, same story. So this time, starting the Energy Podcast and him just writing a new book very recently, I decided he needs to come back to my show. So I brought him on board. Now, let me give you guys a little bit of a brief introduction on who Thor is, because you guys are going to love it. So Thor Hanson was born and raised in the Pacific Northwest, where he lives with his family. And his childhood is filled with a love of nature, from catching salmon at age 4 to collecting tadpoles and tree frogs. He is led to degrees. He has degrees from University of Redlands, University of Vermont, and a PhD through University of Idaho and Costa Rica's CATIE. Catty? I'm not sure. His global fieldwork spans Central American tree songbirds, Tanzanian nest predation, African vultures, Ugandan gorilla tourism, and Alaskan brown bears. He specializes in human-nature intersections, including habitat fragmentation and warfare's ecological impacts. Guggenheim and Switzer Fellow, Hanson consults on conservation, co-hosted PBS's Nature's American Spring Life, and appeared on NPR's Fresh Air, Science Friday, and more. His books include Hurricane Lizards and Plastic Squid, Buzz, Triumph of Seeds, Feathers, and The Impenetrable Forest. Plus children's titles like Bartholomew Quill. Honors include the John Burroughs Medal and multiple Pacific Northwest Book Awards. His work is translated into over 10 different languages. He co-edited Warfare Ecology and has published in Bioscience, Conservation Biology, and popular outlets like Audubon and the Wall Street Journal. Before we bring Thor onto the show, I would like to plug in our products because we are sponsored ourselves by our Energy Pods, which are our 2-ounce meal replacement products that we make here in Napa, California under KG Food Co. These Energy Pods are completely shelf-stable, delicious meal replacement snacks that can be used as a spread, dip, eaten as is, or you can make your own dessert. They come with a compostable paperboard spoon. Nutritionally, they are sugar-free, almond-packed, and protein-enriched. They are unlike anything you can find in the market. Meanwhile, we also have a 12-ounce jar of spread that we also sell, and it's called Cocozen. It is very similar to our Energy Pods. You can think of it as a bigger brother to the Energy Pods. It's a little bit more spread-like compared to the Energy Pods, but it's the same concept in general. You can buy these products at our website, which is KG Food Co., or you could go to Amazon or Walmart Marketplace and buy it from those platforms as well, whichever place you choose. You guys can buy the product and leave us a review. It would mean a lot to us. Try it out, see what you guys think. If you're going on a backpacking trip in the near future, out and about traveling, or just need some delicious chocolate or coffee products to take you through the entire day without any stimulants and need all the clean nutrition and energy pods or Cocozen are fantastic. Great for athletes, great before and after workouts. You guys will love it. Meanwhile, while you guys are out and about, please do subscribe to this podcast. Leave us a review. It really helps us bring more and more guests to our show as well, because people look at the podcast, see the reviews, see the engagement, see the comments, and it all keeps growing. So none of this will grow without your guys' support. So please do leave us a review, leave us some comments, anything at all. And it means a lot to me and everybody else who is listening to this show. So without further ado, let us bring up my interview with Thor Hanson to you guys. Guys, have fun.
Well, the one-word answer would be curiosity. I'm just a fundamentally curious person, and I am very, very committed to learning about the world around me. And so that curiosity sort of drives, I'm a curiosity-driven enterprise from start to finish. But in more detail, I began my career in the sciences, really, and went all the way through the academic steps in terms of getting my degrees and so forth in biology and conservation biology, and have done research and worked various places around the world doing some really fascinating, interesting things. And one thing that I noticed in the academic world that happened so often was I would see these great ideas, these fascinating discoveries that wouldn't seem to make it beyond the relatively limited audience of peer-reviewed journals and so forth, which are an essential part of the scientific process. But I think there are many times where we need to take our stories further. We need to seek a broader audience for these ideas. And so I began to try to tell some of those stories. And over the last, 15, 20 years or so, that aspect of my career has really taken over. And I really consider myself now a storyteller of science.
I call you more or less the Indiana Jones of conservation and ecology. How's that for a title?
I've been called worse, I'll tell you. I'll take it.
Oh, so now this begs the question. We just came from a COVID lockdown a few years back, and everybody's starting to explore the great wild world. And so how does one develop such a knack for curiosity and exploration? And throughout your period of time, you've probably come across a lot of individuals as well. Like, how has their journey moved from just reading textbooks or reading some sort of theoretical stuff and just transitioned into something more practical, hands-on, and going out there just like you do?
Great question. And I think it really begins in childhood. I think that in a sense, we're all born observers, and we have this innate curiosity about the world around us and what's this and what's that. And to follow up on that, all you need to do is go outside and take a walk with a toddler. And I mean, they are just full of questions and they expect you to know all the answers. And it's an absolute reminder of what it is to see the world with open eyes. They really do take in more information. They have yet to develop all of the filters that we all use day to day to block out information. I mean, our world is information overload. If you think about all the media and technology coming at us all the time, you have to be able to block that out to concentrate on what you're trying to do. But in doing so, we also block out a lot of the world around us because the same filter that would block out someone's annoying ringtone is also blocking out the song of the warbler in the tree behind you. And so part of becoming more connected to the world and being able to follow that curiosity is reminding ourselves to take down those filters once in a while, be a little more childlike outside and out in nature, and let more information in, and then follow those leads where they take you.
Is it like someone who snaps after a corporate 9 to 5 and starts grabbing a microscope or a magnifying glass and goes out there? Or is it like a slow journey where they start listening to podcasts and then books and then just going out there?
It can take either route. I mean, it can take either route. I have always been fond of watching when I go to scientific conferences and you have a bunch of biologists, and here they are all indoors talking about the natural world. But if you look out the window, pretty soon, usually on the first afternoon, but certainly by day 2 or day 3, you can see people sort of drifting off into the closest green area as they need to recharge their batteries, so to speak, and get out there and look at stuff. And I think all of us are capable of that in nature, getting out and just following that curiosity wherever it goes.
So your latest book, I believe, which is Close to Home, has been recently entering into my gym playlist and during work as well. So I've gone through the entire book as a whole. But my question here is what was the initial spark there which prompted you to pursue this process of writing this book?
Certainly, yes. So I have written a number of books over the years and I've done research all over the place. And a lot of my focus has been on broader geographic areas. I've written about experiences in Africa or Central America, and I've written my last book was on the biology of climate change, which is a global topic indeed. And so the pendulum then swung all the way back to this relatively small geography of backyards and neighborhood parks and things right in your neighborhood that you can see. And what caused that really was, in a sense, a thump, if you will, but it's a thump that we all hate to hear. It was the sound of a bird hitting the window of the little shack in our yard that I use for an office. And I heard that thump and I ran outside, and sure enough, dead in the grass was this beautiful bird, this little hermit thrush. And I felt terrible about it, but I also felt a little bit embarrassed because here I am, a biologist writing about nature, and I had no idea there were hermit thrushes in the yard. And that begged an obvious question. If I didn't know that bird was there, what else was I overlooking close to home? What else was I failing to see right around me? And so that was the spark then that led me to begin exploring the yard, the neighborhood, to see what I could see and try to open my eyes, as we were talking about earlier. Get those filters out of the way and really see what's out there. Go out at night, go out and climb a tree and see what's up there. Crawl on your hands and knees and see what you can find. Or I built a pile of sticks and I sat inside that watching what might walk by. All of these ways to try to observe more and learn more about the nature close to home. And I saw all sorts of amazing things. So that is really the spark of it. And then from those sorts of local experiences, I began to look more broadly at what the data that we can obtain close to home is doing for science. And you find all sorts of research happening now that is using backyard examples. People are entering in the birds they see or the flowers that are blooming, or they're sending in soil samples and helping scientists all around the world to answer fascinating questions about everything from climate change to pollinator populations to bird behavior. I mean, it just goes on and on. So it was a really interesting exploration of what we can see right around us and then how that really is helping to answer fascinating questions.
So after this idea sparked, what was literally the first thing that you did from an action standpoint, just out of curiosity?
The very first thing that I did in writing this book was change how I got to work in the morning, if you will. And I mentioned that I write in this little shack in our yard. And I could walk straight from the house to the little shack. And I reminded myself that, hey, I'm trying to see what's in the yard. So I developed this habit of taking a meandering route all the way around. We have some trees, we have an old garden and an old pasture area. I would take this meandering route all the way around the yard to just remind myself to look at stuff and not be in a hurry to take those straight lines every time I crossed the property. And that was the first thing that I did to try to awaken my senses again.
Which honestly just leads to the next question is like, what was the first thing you discovered?
So that very first day, it really is a true story. I said, okay, we're going to go the long route. So I was walking up the driveway rather than toward the shack. But I still had that sort of hurried mentality that we all have. We've been thinking about what I'm going to do to get to work. And so, okay, I'm taking the long route, but so and so. And I heard this bird singing, and I recognized the call of this vireo. And in the back of my head, I said, oh, that's interesting. It was way down low in the branches of the shrub next to me. And I thought, that's interesting. I usually hear those way up at the top of the trees. I wonder what it's doing. I'll have to come back and look at that sometime. And then I thought, well, wait a minute. No, look at it now. And I physically made myself stop. I said, listen, you are trying to learn about the nature in your yard. And so I stopped and I froze and I looked and I waited till I could see it. And it was this wonderful little vireo that was singing low because it was defending a territory right there where the male and the female had built this beautiful cryptic nest out of lichens and twigs and moss. It was just absolutely almost invisible, and I never would have seen it unless I'd stopped, listened to the bird, and watched it move through the vegetation to reach the nest. And then from there, I sat down, watched the birds as they were, taking turns sitting on eggs. And then while I was sitting there, I overheard behind me this ruckus that I recognized as the sound of baby raccoons. So I got up and I walked through to see this find this nest of raccoons. All of this on the very first morning of consciously trying to explore the yard. So it was a great reminder to me that there's so much out there when we take the time to search for it.
So as someone who's been out in the field and you hear all of these different kinds of sights and sounds, how does your mind process all of this and create perhaps a pattern? Because you're also a scientist, right? So scientists are all about quantification and exploration at the same time. So how does your mind work when you are exposed to so much stimuli around you? Like, what do I do with this?
Well, the first thing I would say is that I believe we're capable of hearing, seeing, and processing a lot of information from right around us, more than we realize. I think we're sort of born for this in a sense. We've evolved to be great observers. We tend to not pursue that as much as we could. But one of the examples that I think of often has to do with, there was a fellow named Ishi some time ago who was one of the last of his tribe, a Native American tribe in Northern California. He'd been living a very traditional lifestyle, and he finally came out of the forest there and met an anthropologist who was very interested in how he lived. And there are some wonderful stories and papers that were written down at that time about Ishi's lifestyle. And one that I would never forget was how this anthropologist was walking with Ishi through the forest, and Ishi kept telling him what they were going to see next. We're going to see this bird. Oh, we're going to see, there's a deer up here. We're going to encounter this. We're going to encounter that. And he finally asked him, like, now, how do you always know what's going to happen? I mean, I'm trying to be really observant, and I don't know what's happening next. And Ishi, he just looked at him like he was mad. And he said, well, I'm just listening to the birds. And the bird song that he could hear was not just what bird it was, but how those birds were reacting to other things in the environment. And he knew their songs so well that he knew the sound they made if there was a hawk nearby, or the sound they might make if they were feeding, or if their flock was split on either side of the trail. He knew all those different calls and sounds. It was just part of the language of his life. And I think about things like that, and I think, we all had those abilities when we lived a lifestyle that was rooted in the natural world. So we're capable of that. We may never attain that level, but we're certainly capable of processing more information. So I always remind myself when I'm outdoors to try to listen to the birds in that way. And if you do that sort of thing, whether it's birds or whether you're observing flowers or looking for bees or whatever it may be, what happens is you quickly develop a sense of what's normal. You quickly develop a sense of what you are likely to hear or likely to see or smell or what have you. And the importance of that is then the strange things really stand out. When you hear something unusual, then you know to pursue it. When you see something, when you smell something that isn't quite what you're expecting, if you leave yourself open to those moments, then you really are able to follow up and learn something new. So I think that those sorts of practices are rooted, at least for me, in how to take those observations in nature, those daily observations, and categorize them and sort out the important things that you may be overlooking or missing.
That is fantastic. It reminds me, the way I'm starting to think of it is like, for example, you're at a symphony and there's different levels of musicians out in there. And if a musician who's very attuned to how the symphony works, they'll probably understand what notes are being played. And maybe if there's something off, they'll capture that. But for someone who's just appreciating it from a distance, then they might not be able to see that until they go to so many different orchestras and maybe pick up an instrument. That's kind of like how I'm sort of visualizing it. So just to further build upon this, let's say if I work a normal job or if I'm a student, I don't know where to start this exploration, whether it is through my own backyard or anywhere else. How can one attune themselves or start exposing themselves to this sort of, could it be right to say lifestyle or exploration?
Sure. I think it's a great question. And my first reaction to that is two words, and that is sit still. Sit still. And you don't have to sit still in the wilderness. And that's one of the things that I really discovered in this sort of backyard exploration. There are really fascinating marvels of nature in almost any patch of greenery. And so you look for something that's easy to reach. If you have a park nearby, or if you have a yard or some sort of open space, some sort of greenery, get out there, find a place that you can sit still, quiet, and listen. And at first it's really hard because we're used to stimulus, aren't we? I mean, we're used to the phone dinging every minute to get our attention, or we're used to, dramatic entertainments or intense workloads or whatever it may be. So those first minutes are very strange. But once you get over that hump, then you're able to start to see whether it's the squirrel that uses this little fence line as a pathway back and forth all day, carrying nuts to some cache that it's making for winter, or whether it's some insect that you've never noticed, or whether it's the pattern of leaves in the tree and what it looks like from a distance. All these things can start to seep in when you sit still and take that time. So sitting still in any patch of green you can find, and just ignore those strange looks you're going to get from the neighbors. That's all right. They'll get over it. They'll get used to seeing you out there. That's a good practice for them as well. So that would be the first thing that occurs to me, to bridge that. And it just involves taking that time and allowing your senses to absorb things.
Would you recommend somebody to sit still and sort of sit down like an hour, half an hour, 2 hours, or as long as possible?
You start small, I think. I think you can start small, and I think you'll be amazed that you can see something new to you in a place that you cross without thinking all the time. It makes sense, though, in that, we are used to ideas of nature from, nature documentaries and things, which are wonderful. And we don't know all the countless hours, we didn't experience all the hours it took those photographers to get those dramatic pictures. Or we think about, well, I'm going to connect with nature on that weekend hike I have planned with friends, or we're going to go to a national park for vacation this year in July. That'll be, 4 days of nature. That's when I'm going to do it. And that's all important. All those things are fantastic. But what it overlooks is the fact that the vast majority of our interactions with the natural world take place, between the car and the front door. They take place between the back door and the garbage cans, right? The places that we cross all the time that are outdoors when we're not focused on nature at all of those are opportunities to experience nature. And what's out there is totally fascinating. Let me give you one example, and it has to do with garbage cans, but it's one of my favorites from that whole experience of researching the book, and that has to do with garbage cans in Greater Sydney, Australia, where a behavioral ecologist named Barbara Clump began advertising on the radio back in 2008. And she was asking homeowners all over Sydney, renters, whoever had a garbage can, to keep an eye out and let her know if they have ever seen a parrot opening the garbage can. And first of all, it's a great question to ask because, that's a weird behavior. Who wouldn't notice a bird opening the garbage can? And second of all, the parrot involved is this massive white bird with the floppy yellow feathers on it. It's the sulfur-crested cockatoo. It's this incredible parrot. So anyone's going to notice this. And she started to amass this data set because she and her team had observed this on a couple of occasions, and they wanted to know how widespread it was. So again, now with people in the most mundane places you can imagine, on their side of their driveway or behind the garage or whatever, making these observations and sending them in to Clump's team, they were able to pinpoint a few neighborhoods where this behavior had developed. And then, since it was such a brand new behavior, they were able to watch over the next 2 years as the parrots taught one another how to do this difficult task. And they were able to see that parrots taught this behavior to one another, and it spread like wildfire. Well, not like a wildflower. Like it spread like wildfire across Greater Sydney from just a handful of neighborhoods to more than 40 neighborhoods. Parrots all over the place began to do this. But as that behavior spread, it also began to change. And she realized that they were not only teaching one another, but they were teaching and developing certain neighborhood styles for this behavior. Some would lift the lid of the can with a foot. Some would use the bill. Some would use the foot and the bill together. They would walk in different ways to push the lid back. They were teaching themselves to do it in different ways, developing what in behavioral ecology is known as culture. Behaviors that we learn from those around us that vary based on geography. It's the same way we define culture in human societies. It's why the food in Mexico is different from the food found in Italy, for example. All of these sort of cultural things are absorbed from our surroundings. And the parrots were doing the same thing with garbage cans. And that is a rare thing to see or document in nature, and it didn't happen out in the wilderness. It happened in people's yards.
I gotta ask two burning questions right away, and one of them is probably in everybody's brain right now. One is, why were the parrots opening garbage cans? And the second question is, just out of curiosity, has any species or animals ever developed primitive rudimentary tools?
These are, what wonderful questions. Okay, the first question first, and it has to do with food. If you think about it from a parrot's standpoint, and a parrot like that is smart, they're good scavengers, and they realize that these garbage cans, which are standardized across Greater Sydney, same garbage collection system, so all the cans look the same with the same red lid or what have you. So they knew what they looked like, and they knew if they could get them open, there might be pizza crust in there or, some old fruit or whatever it might be that would be tasty for them. So it was absolutely a food-driven behavior. And your second question about tool use is a wonderful question. And it's another thing that we do observe now in nature that's rare, but has been documented a number of times. Tool use, as a smart primate, we've for generations tried to tell ourselves that we're so different from all the other animals in some fashion. And one of the ways we always used to try to define that was tool use. Only Homo sapiens is clever enough to have figured out how to fashion and tools to manipulate objects. Well, that sort of started falling apart at first with the trouble with the vulture and the rock. And that is the Egyptian vulture in Africa, which was well known for using rocks to crack open ostrich eggs to eat them. That was, a warning sign that the tool theory was going to fall apart. Then old Jane Goodall, bless her heart, may she rest in peace, she was one of the first to really document this in nature in a detailed way, and learned how chimpanzees would pick particular twigs and fashion them in the right way to fish for termites, sticking those twigs down into the holes of termite mounds and then eating the termites that grabbed hold of the stick. So that was another example. And from there, it has expanded. And one of my favorites, a recent discovery, is a population of dolphins in somewhere down off of Australia, where they have learned to use sea sponges to cover their snouts. So they will find a particular vase-shaped sponge that fits the end of their snout, and then they can go down into the sort of rocky bottoms that are sharp bits of coral and things that might scratch their snout, and they can snurfle around down in there with this sponge on their nose and scare out little fish and then grab the fish as they're scared out of the gravel. So a wonderful way to use a tool to improve their foraging techniques. Other examples include things like the New Caledonian crow that will fashion very carefully and very skillfully hooks from spines and twigs and so forth to pry grubs out of rotten wood and that sort of thing. So there are a number of creatures out there now that we can show using tools, sometimes in some very complicated ways.
How are these creatures, are they innately born with the ability to create tools, use tools, or is that something they adopt as they adapt to an environment, or it's a combination of both? I guess it's the same classic nature versus nurture sort of example here. Can we tie this all together somehow? Is there like a theme we can notice?
Well, I think it's a combination. I mean, certainly there's a certain amount of nature. You have to have some capacity for reasoning and some capacity physically for manipulating objects. But then you also have the nurture in that many of these practices are taught from one animal to the next. So they are raised, if you will, in a society, an animal society, where these things are learned from their peers, from their parents, and so forth. And also there's a certain amount of intelligence involved in terms of experimentation to develop these things in the first place, to learn new behaviors. You know, that the dolphins with their sponges is very restricted to a certain population, where some dolphins came up with this notion and taught it to those around them. And now the offspring are learning it, and it's becoming more widespread. So it's a combination of those things. There has to be a certain ability, but you also have to have teaching, and you have to have curiosity involved to make it all come together.
Going back to the whole exploration journey, are there certain communities or certain networks or apps or something that people can tap into when they want to start this sort of a journey, or they're already part of a journey and feeling alone?
Yes, absolutely. And this is something that, is relatively new, but it is really beginning to help people bridge that gap. Sort of the back to nature gap, if you will. And one, of course, would be iNaturalist, which began in exactly the way you're describing, in that it was developed as a graduate student project at the University of California at Berkeley by a group of students, one of whom was new to the area. He was an avid naturalist. He loved birds and bugs and all kinds and plants, you name it. He just wanted to be out there. But he was new to the place. He didn't know anything locally. He was from another part of the country. And he was curious about, like, how am I going to get my head around all these new plants and birds and things? And wouldn't it be handy if I had a community, an online community, where we could exchange this sort of information? So iNaturalist very much began as that sort of a tool. How can I put up a picture of this plant I just saw on my walk? And if there's someone else on the app who knows it, they could tell me what it is. And it has blossomed since then into this worldwide effort to do just that, to allow people to put names on the things around them, which is a very, it's a subtle, but important aspect to learning about the natural world. And this harkens back to what we were talking about a moment ago, about trying to know what's normal in your surroundings so you notice the odd things. Well, part of doing that involves naming, because when we name something, we're able to categorize it a little bit in our head. And so when we can put names on the stuff around us, it really begins to help us differentiate, between the birds and between the plants, and then notice the ones that don't fit in, or the behaviors that are strange because we've sort of put a name on the things around us. So that naming tool is really important, and iNaturalist is a great way to get started with that. Similarly, there's an app from the Cornell Laboratory of Ornithology called Merlin, which allows people to identify birds in one mode by the songs that they make. So you can record, just have Merlin going, and it will tell you the birds that are around you. So now the important thing, or one very important thing, and I've talked with the founders of, or one of the founders of iNaturalist about this, is that it's important that it doesn't stop there. So in a sense, these sorts of tech tools are a gateway to nature. And we want them to be a starting point so that you start to see more. But if it begins and ends with an app, we don't want that. We want it to go farther, right? We want the excitement of knowing what's around you to lead to more exploration. And I think it naturally does. But sometimes we have to remind ourselves of that. And sometimes that means turning the app off and going back to that sitting still thing we were talking about to remind yourself to observe, and that you can do a lot of it on your own, even without the app. So the app is a tool, but it shouldn't be the only thing that we do in nature.
So we are in the age of artificial intelligence nowadays. And besides the videos in which the octopus looks like a Cthulhu monster with 7 heads, besides those videos that are generated, which are kind of crazy that you can do that, how has this new avenue impacted all this exploration? Is it a net positive? Is it a mixed bag of tricks? Or are we finding out more stuff?
Well, definitely there are some applications now for AI, and some of these tools we've been talking about have AI built in to help identify things more quickly for people. There are also scientists who are using AI to sort massive amounts of data, just what one person listens to in their yard. But if you turn on microphones across a landscape and take in huge amounts of data, people are using AI to do the first level of sorting, at least, to know what is going on in a landscape. So there are applications for it in science, certainly. Again, the important thing, or one of the important things about any of these tech tools, is to remind ourselves it shouldn't stop there. It shouldn't stop there, because one of our goals, or for many of us at least, is to reinvigorate that connection with nature, which is good for nature and good for us in many ways. And so we always want to make sure that we use these things as tools, the same way you would use a spade to dig a hole or use your binoculars to see something far away. These are tools, but that's not all we do.
Gotcha. Now I'm gonna shift gears into some more fun questions, and I'm gonna ask them because they were like, when I wrote them down, I just couldn't stop myself. So let's say if I want to start exploration and I'm a rookie, or even if it's you, like, do you have a select few tools that you can just grab easily and just start exploring right away?
Yeah, and now I'm reaching into my pockets to show you. Always, I carry with me a hand lens. This is a tiny little magnifier. It fits right in your pocket, folds up nice. It's a 10-powered hand lens, and you would be amazed at what you can see with something like this. So I always have a hand lens on me at all times. And in my pocket, I also carry one of these tiny little tape measures. Always have the tape measure handy so you can measure things. If you can see things that are small, and if you can measure things, it opens up a whole new world of exploration. So those are 2 things I carry with me at all times.
Are you more of a nighttime person, evening time person, or a daytime person when it comes to exploration? What's your favorite time? And let's add even more fun. Like, what kind of ideal environment? Like, would you like it in wintertime, summertime, springtime?
Every season has its own possibilities, and different times of day have different things. I am fascinated by getting out at night, but I find it harder to do. I mean, you get sort of in your, and I think it's an atavistic human condition to be a little bit afraid of the dark, right? Because we come from a background in our evolutionary history of where it was pretty important to stick close to the cave or close to the fire because we were part of the food chain in a very different way. And there were dangers lurking in the darkness. So I think some of that sticks with us, and it makes it harder to get outdoors. But if you can, force yourself away from the light and so forth, it's a wonderful time to explore. It's a wonderful time. And one of the things that makes it fun and is a good practice is to take a flashlight and allow yourself to focus all your attention on just what's in that little beam, just what's in the beam, what's visible. because it's challenging sometimes when we're out in the daylight and there's all this stuff we can see. What do you look at? My gosh, it's sort of overwhelming. Well, if you go at night and you have a flashlight with a narrow beam, you're just looking at one little patch and you'll see all sorts of interesting things there. So going out at night has a whole realm of possibilities. I spend more time outdoors during the day. The mornings are wonderful for birds, but I'm kind of attracted to, what in biology, there's a wonderful word for this. It's crepuscular. The crepuscular part of the day is the transition between light to dark. So we have crepuscular moments in the evening during twilight and crepuscular moments at dawn. And it's sort of a changing of the guard. I love the moment of the day where you hear the night sounds giving way to the morning sounds, where, the rasping of an insect and the hoot of an owl starts to give way to the bird song in the morning and that sort of thing. Those are fascinating times to be out there. So different seasons have different possibilities as well. Springtime is wonderful for all the things migrating through in terms of birds and so forth, and all the insects becoming active. There's a lot going on, the plants blooming and so on. But winter has its moments too. If you can get to a place with snow, or if you have a snowfall wherever you live, it's a real opportunity. It can open your eyes to all the things you're missing in the neighborhood because those things leave tracks. And so you get out and you suddenly realize, oh my gosh, you can see where the mice have been running around. You can see where a fox crossed, or you can see where the deer were wandering through to get to the neighbors. So all of these things, are revealed when you see that snowfall in the morning. Get out there and check it out. There's so much to see. So each season sort of has its opportunities in terms of nature observation.
Is there a part on planet Earth within its ecology that is a gold mine just waiting to be explored, or doesn't get as much attention as from a scientific perspective or an exploratory perspective you think is like that's something that is perhaps in the future, or perhaps something that needs to be tapped out a little bit more?
There are many places that we don't understand, and many groups of organisms that we don't understand very well at all. Some of this is logical. You think, well, the deep sea is a huge habitat that's very difficult to reach. So we're still, even if we're starting to learn some of the things that live there, we don't know how they live, because by the time we bring them to the surface, they've usually perished, and we don't even have a good idea of their behavior. So that is an obvious one, but there are more subtle ones as well. And I'll give you two that, again, are close to home. And one is, if you live in a place that has trees, you're familiar with seeing the trunks of the trees here and there, and the low-hanging branches and the birds that might be visible in them, and the insects and so forth. But what's happening up at the top? The tree canopy in any forest remains poorly explored. We have little idea of all the creatures that are living up there. There was a famous experiment done back in the 60s where a scientist was in a sort of a dryish forest in Costa Rica, biodiverse, but not as biodiverse as the Amazon, but quite diverse forest. And anyway, decided to see what was living up in the top of one of these trees. So put tarps down, and then used actually an insecticide to kill what was living in the tree, fogged the top of the tree, and counted and sorted all the things that dropped down, and discovered an incredible diversity of insects, and in particularly an incredible diversity of beetles. And many of them, as this experiment was conducted in place to place, were specific in where they lived, in that they might only occur in one species of tree. And they started doing the math and realizing, my God, there are hundreds of species of trees here. And if each one of these trees has its dedicated population of many species of beetles, what is the diversity of that canopy up there? And numbered in the millions and millions of species of insects that were unknown, because most of these things had never been seen. So there are places like that, but not just the rainforest. The same thing can be said. We know relatively little, even now, about canopies of trees in North America, for example. So a tree canopy. And then even more subtle, but also very poorly known, would be what lives on and within the leaves of the most common shrubs and trees in our environment. You walk into your yard and it's some common shrub that grows, in the forest around, and you've got one growing there. Well, take a close look at the leaf, and you're likely to see some sort of insect damage to the leaf. The evidence that something's been chewing on it, or in many cases, you might see what we call a leaf mine. And a leaf mine is that pattern. It almost looks like someone drew a little bit of calligraphy on the leaf. There's a little looping pattern. And what that is the larva of an insect that is chewing its way through the leaf, making a perfectly good living for itself on that tender tissue. And then it will emerge as the adult when it's had its full meal. And leaf miners are poorly, people are describing new leaf miners all the time. There's a great story that I put in the book that comes from a backyard in Massachusetts that I went to visit because Charlie Eisman and Julia Blythe live there and have transformed this. It was just an acre of lawn, and they've transformed it into this wonderland of native plants and all the things that go with them. And the first thing they did was we're just going to stop mowing this lawn and see what comes up. And they've planted a lot of stuff too. But the first thing they did was, forget it. We're not going to mow this. See what happens. And one of the first native plants to become established was a little plant in the aster family with, cute little purple flowers in the summertime. And it's a common sort of native, but sort of weedy native that comes up in pastures and so forth. So it was not surprising that would get established there. They were glad to see it. And they watched it develop, and Charlie noticed that there were some of these leaf miners moving through the leaves. And so he raised those up, and he discovered that the fly that was developing in the leaves of the first native plant that arrived in their yard was a species new to science. No one had ever looked at that fly before. So you can discover new species just by paying close attention to the leaves and what's happening on them in your own backyard.
I had no idea about leaf miners at all till now. That's kind of crazy. Okay, I have a little bit of a dumb question, but I'm gonna ask it anyway because I don't know, people can judge me. Bioluminescence sounds like pinning a death target on yourself. So why does it exist in nature?
Bioluminescence is a wonderful topic. There are all sorts of situations where this has evolved, but the ability to glow is not exactly common, but it's not unknown. And one of the main reasons it occurs, at least in the ocean, if you think about what we call, the phosphorescence in the ocean at certain times of year, this is created by little dinoflagellates and other little creatures that live there. And the flash of luminescence they give off when they're disturbed is thought to be a defense against predation. So if a predator is coming along and wants to eat these little things, if they can flash light and startle it, they have an instant to get away. And one of the fascinating studies, this was back, I think it must have been in the 70s, maybe the 80s. Anyway, they did to try to prove this was to study a community of these small creatures, including little fish and zooplankton and other things that were living in the seawater. And they realized that some of the fish or the little zooplankton would in fact eat these little things. But then, because they were semi-transparent, they were in a world of hurt, because they had this glowing thing visible in their belly, and a bigger thing would come and eat them. And so they were able to establish this wonderful evolutionary story going on where some of these creatures they were sort of translucent, but they had solid stomach linings that would shield the glow of whatever it was they were eating so that bigger predators wouldn't be able to see them. So you see this wonderful situation playing out where the bioluminescence starts in one creature and then affects other creatures all the way through that web. So totally fascinating. A great opportunity for you in your new career as a biologist would be to sort out some more of these wonderful bioluminescent stories.
I think I was just thinking this kind of ruins the whole romantic experience where you're watching the stars and the bioluminescence. Little do you know, there's like flashbang warfare going on down there.
Yes, nature, red in tooth and claw, even at night on a romantic evening.
All right, I gotta ask this question. Now we're going into the realms of violence anyway, so is Last of Us actually possible?
I'm sorry, what was the question again?
Is Last of Us possible?
No, it's not a dumb question at all. I've not seen the show, but I understand it's about zombies that are sort of controlled in some fashion by a fungus. But we're learning more and more examples of the way that fungi can impact other organisms, they can live within other organisms and impact them. And I'll give you one example, not to do with people, but it does give you a sense of what's possible. And that is if you look in, certain, fields in the mountains, you'll see, well, it's a common genus, but anyway, the little mustard plant, the genus is Erebus. And the Erebus is impacted by a parasitic fungus not every plant, but some plants get this fungus. And when this, I think it's Puccinellia fungus, sounds like an Italian pasta dish, but nonetheless, when it invades the leaves of and the stem of the rosette stage of the Arabis, it's just a little tuft of leaves, might be a rosette for several years while it's building up the energy to finally send up its tall flowering stalk and reproduce toward the end of its life cycle. Well, the fungus gets in there and it co-opts that system. And what it does is it causes that little rosette to send up a false stalk, and it causes it co-opts how the plant would naturally grow, and it transforms its flower completely. It transforms the leaves to create a false yellow flower that looks nothing like an Arabis flower. It also transforms that so that it produces a sticky, sweet substance on that flower. And then the fungus loads that up with one of its forms of spores for dispersing, reproducing. So that what happens is bees and other pollinators are tricked completely into visiting this pseudo flower. It's not a true flower, but they're perfectly happy to eat that sweet goop off there. It's fine. They don't get any pollen because the plant itself never made a true flower. It's just this crazy fungal flower that has been created. So the fungus takes over the plant, uses the plant's resources for its own purposes, much in the same way I understand as in this zombie movie, the fungus takes over people and puts them to work to its own nefarious ends.
Man, people are thinking AI is the doom, the Skynet is the doom. It's the fungus we should watch out. All right, I think we're starting to end our hour of discussion. Is there anything else that you would like to cover, or we can start wrapping things up?
We've had a wonderful, far-ranging discussion as usual, very enjoyable. My final words on this would be that when we get out and do this sort of exploration, it's not just what it brings to us in terms of information and that connection to nature, but also how nature helps us physically, in that there are these very well documented physical benefits from spending more time outdoors. And you can even get a prescription for nature exposure now from doctors in 34 states. It's that we have that much science backing this up. So it's very good for us to be out there. And then it can also be very good for nature in that the more we pay attention, the more we recognize what we can do to help all these teeny little creatures. Like that couple that I mentioned in Massachusetts, who have transformed this yard from a very sterile lawn to a wonderland of native plants by letting things grow, by planting things that they've gotten from native plant nurseries and so forth, and then by enjoying and loving and encouraging all the insects and birds and mammals and things that have come into that yard to use this wonderful new habitat. We can do that even on a small scale. You can do it in a window box. You can do it in the gravel beside your driveway. There are all sorts of little patches that we can manipulate to improve their habitat quality and encourage more native wildlife on the scale appropriate to these close to home settings.
Absolutely. I think I'm going to go downstairs and not wear AirPods for a start while I'm grilling some food. So that'll be my starting point. Yeah.
There you go.
So,
Tell me what you hear out there. I love it.
how can people find you, support you? Any links, plugs that you got?
Sure. I'm a little old fashioned, so I'm not real connected on social media, but I do have a website, and the address there is thorhanson.com.
Awesome. And I'll put that in the show notes as well. Thank you so much. It's always a machine gun style fun festival with you.
A pleasure as always, Fahad. Thanks for having me on.